Welcome to Even Tacos Fall Apart, a podcast where we do our best to own our stories, love ourselves, and thrive as we become more mentally stable, emotionally healthy, and physically well with each passing day. I'm MommaFoxFire, and today we have a very important topic to discuss: diabetes and mental health. Before we get to the interview, I want to say thank you for joining and encourage you to stick around for this conversation. Your support and engagement, even just listening, means the world to me, and it's what keeps this community thriving as well. Today's episode is close to my heart because it touches on a subject that affects millions of people around the world, and that includes two of my grandparents. Diabetes is a chronic condition that doesn't just impact the body, it has profound effects on mental health as well. Living with diabetes means constant monitoring, planning meals, managing medications, and coping with the unpredictability of blood sugar levels. It's a relentless daily battle that can take a significant toll on a person's mental and emotional well-being in addition to their physical well-being. Our guest today, Chet Galaska, has been living with type 1 diabetes for over 43 years. He has firsthand experience of the struggles and triumphs that come with managing this condition. Chet is not just a diabetic, he is an advocate, an educator, and someone who has dedicated his life to dispelling the myths and stigma surrounding diabetes. He's here to share his journey and provide insights into how diabetes impacts mental health and what we can do to support those living with diabetes. One of the biggest misconceptions about diabetes is that it's entirely a result of poor lifestyle choices. This stigma can lead to feelings of guilt and shame for diabetics, making it even harder to manage their condition. The reality is that diabetes is a genetic condition triggered by various factors, and no one should be blamed for having it. Understanding this is crucial for offering the right support and reducing the mental burden on diabetics. Another critical aspect of diabetes that we'll discuss in the interview today is the concept of diabetes burnout. Managing diabetes is a 24/7 job with no breaks. The constant vigilance required can lead to overwhelming feelings of exhaustion and frustration, and that burnout can significantly affect mental health, leading to anxiety and depression and a sense of hopelessness. It's important to recognize those feelings and find ways to cope and seek support. We will also highlight the importance of education and peer support in our conversation today. When diabetics are educated about their condition and have a support system, it can alleviate some of the guilt and shame they may feel. Knowing that they are not alone and that others understand their struggles can make a world of difference. So grab a comfortable seat, maybe get a cup of tea or your favorite beverage, and get ready for a deep dive into the intersection of diabetes and mental health. This conversation is not just for those living with diabetes, but for everyone who wants to understand and support their loved ones better. Let's learn, grow, and support each other in this journey. Thank you for being here and for being a part of this community. I hope you find this episode helpful, and if you do, please share it with others and let me know your thoughts as well. Your engagement helps me continue to have these important conversations. Now, without further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Chet Galaska. Hello, I know I'm sorry, but I forgot to start that one program that handles all of that. But I saw your message and I was like, oh shit, I got to start that. So it started now. Give it a second and it'll all work the way that it's supposed to. My bad. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Mental Health Monday here on Even Tacos Fall Apart. I'm really excited for our conversation tonight. I was talking with Chet before we got started about my personal connection with diabetes. My grandfather had diabetes for as long as I can remember. I don't ever remember him not having diabetes. So I've, loved someone who has diabetes, of course, obviously, but I've also seen kind of the things that he went through and some of the misunderstandings I feel like that were around it. So I'm excited to talk about this tonight. We're going to be talking about diabetes and also about mental health. So if you have any questions related to that, let me get this question queue open. I don't remember if I actually opened it. Nope, it's open. So if you have a question for tonight, feel free to enter it into the chat. I'll make sure to ask it. You can type !Q, follow that with your question, and that'll put it into the queue if you're on Twitch. If you're on YouTube, just drop it into the chat. I'll make sure to get to it, I promise. But we are here with Chet Galaska, and I'm going to read you a little bit about Chet. So he's a retired businessman who is working to dispel myths and misperceptions that surround diabetes. He's not a medical professional, but he has had the disease since 1981 and sees things from the perspective of people who have diabetes and experience the issues that he discusses. The basic problem is that people generally do not understand diabetes, and much of what they believe is untrue. So to address that, he wrote a book. It's called The Diabetes Book, What Everyone Should Know. And he also developed the Challenge Diabetes program, which teaches the basics to diabetics, those who care about them, and anyone who wants to know the facts. He's presented that program in cooperation with civic, church, and social groups, as well as the YMCA, the University of Massachusetts, and Springfield College. He received the Heroes Walking Among Us Award from the Massachusetts Foot and Ankle Society for his work. And Chet's goal is to create an informed and supportive social environment that respects diabetics, who fight it, and encourages those who don't take it seriously. I do have Chet's website, so if you're interested in learning more about anything that I just said or catching up with our guest, feel free to pop over there. And Chet, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we do have a question in the chat, and I will explain very quickly that the website that I normally use to pop everything up on the screen is not working. So you're going to be used to seeing me pop things up on the screen. I'm not going to be able to do that tonight. Big bummer. Featured chat. Let me know when you come back up, because I would love to use you again. But Bite Mark would like to know, what is your favorite poem?
My favorite poem?
Yeah.
Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I'm not big into poetry.
Listen, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Stars.
Mama, when I read, I tend to read nonfiction too. So yeah. I guess I just don't have the cultural diversity to be into poetry. Sorry about that. What's your favorite poem?
Oh, my favorite poem. Okay, hold on. All right, I can never remember the name of this poem, but I created a command because I always forget the name of it. So it's by Hannah Danes, and it's called Don't Kill Yourself Today. And it's a lot of different things. It starts off, don't kill yourself today because your Netflix free trial still has a week left. Don't kill yourself today because no one else will finish off the chicken in the fridge. Don't kill yourself today because I know for a fact Starbucks is introducing a new Frappuccino sometime next month. Yes, your mother will miss you. Yes, your bully will make a sappy Facebook post about what a wonderful person you were. Yes, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, but you know that, you've known that. Almost anyone and everyone has been shoving that down your throat since you first learned what the word suicide meant. And it just goes on with all of these different reasons, like don't kill yourself until you finish your shampoo and conditioner at the same time. So I feel like it's a really cool perspective on suicidal ideations, and I love it. It's absolutely one of my favorites. It's wonderful.
I can see why.
Yeah, but Twinkle Twinkle is still a wonderful poem, most definitely. Do you listen to music?
I do.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite song? That's poetry right there.
I like Springsteen from way back.
Yeah.
Springsteen actually came to town. I live in the Springfield, Massachusetts area. So we don't have a major league civic center here. We do have one that seats about 6,000 people. And Springsteen came into town before he really hit it big, just before he hit it big. And he played that civic center cut in half. It was practically like being in a nightclub. There were maybe 1,500 people there. It was all real close. It was fabulous. And it was just after he had his first big albums. One of the songs that I liked a lot was Jungle Land. It's a long song. It goes way back to the 70s. But I like that. I like a lot of music, anything, 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s stuff. I listen to a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
And there are some songs I like better than others, but I like most genres.
Mm-hmm. Hey, that's okay. Look, I feel like music is one of those things that it is definitely poetry, and there's always something that someone can say, hey, I like that. I guess I don't know the song Jungle Land, so I bookmarked it so I can go listen to it later.
Well, do that, Mama, because you'll
I
find that
will.
that is poetry, and it does tell a story.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I like it. It'll bring you right back to like 1975. There's one line in there about the local cop's cherry top. You're probably too young to remember when the cop cars had cherry tops or round lights out right in the middle of
Mm-hmm.
the roof of the cruiser.
Yep.
So, it's that kind of thing that you can visualize when you listen to the song.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
it. That's
and
awesome.
it's long. He was told shortly after that if he wanted to be a big star, he had to cut his songs down to length so the DJs would play them.
Yeah.
But that's still one of my favorites.
Yeah, there's some songs now that I feel like are a little too short, but I do know that there are some bands who were told many times, like, make your songs shorter
Yeah.
for that very reason. Well, Bite Mark said her favorite poem is by Shel Silverstein, and it's listen to the mustn'ts, child, listen to the don'ts, listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts, listen to the never haves, and listen close to me. Anything can happen, child. Anything can be. And I love Shel Silverstein, so that's perfect.
Cool.
Now, what do you enjoy doing when you're not busy being an advocate and a writer and running your own support community?
I have 3 grandchildren. I have 2 sons. They both had children around the same time. So they're a boy and a girl. Right now, they're just turning 5. And
Aww.
and they are the most fun in my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
I like doing lots of things, but my favorite thing is playing with those kids.
I
Um,
love
they,
that.
they come over, and one of them bought one of them bought me these things. They're called Tickle Monster gloves. What it is these big padded gloves that have holes for the fingers, so your fingers actually stick out. It's
Uh-huh.
all covered in this fake fur and multicolored. And when the kids are here together, tell me, go get the monster gloves. We tickle each other, and it's
Yeah.
it's just a fun thing to do. Um, at Christmas, my family we each have a different member of the family to buy gifts for, and we tell people what we really want and need. But there's also one open category. Well, in the open category, I said I just want something that the kids and I will enjoy playing with. So
Aw.
so they bought these water powered rockets. You pump the things up and you let them go, and they'll go like 200 feet in the air.
Mm-hmm.
So, my grandson, who was there when my son was rapping it, said, "Can't we play with them now?" So
Of course.
that's going to be a hit in the springtime when we go out and start doing that.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, of all the things that I do, that is my favorite thing to do.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, there's nothing like a grandparent getting their grandchild a toy and then the child being like, open it now.
Yeah.
I know that always cracks my dad up whenever he has my kids and gets them something and they're like, let's do it right now.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting, It kind of, I've never really, I'm older now, but I still feel like a child inside a lot.
Yeah.
And I can relate to those kids. It's like, we get together and, we're all on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
And it's just cool.
Yep.
My wife is a little more responsible than I am. And, she thinks maybe I should act a little more responsible. But I'm sorry, it's just too much fun.
Not around the grandkids. Come on.
Not around, no way. No way. So, yeah, it's great.
Yeah. What's your
What do you do
favorite?
for,
Oh, what do I do for fun? I game a
yeah.
lot. I do a lot of gaming. Obviously, lots of stuff with my kids, but
Mhm.
that sometimes is not as much fun as it is like I have to do it.
Yeah. Oh,
They have a lot of activities, a lot of events and stuff, so that takes away the scheduling of it all. I think takes away a little bit of the joy of it. Whenever they have something special that they want to go do, I really enjoy doing that. I got to take my 17-year-old to the aquarium with 5 of his friends just recently. That was actually a blast because it wasn't like, oh, mom, I have to do this thing for school, or oh, mom, there's this thing that I want to go to. Can I have money for it? It was like, will you take us? And it was really cute and really sweet. And I had a lot of fun doing
nice.
that. Yeah.
Hey,
And, he's getting to the age where like that there aren't going to be very many more of those.
No, you're right. Time flies. My kids are 40
Yeah.
and 38. Time does
Yep.
fly.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, in my spare time, I do a lot of gaming, and I do this. Obviously,
Mhm.
podcasting is a lot of fun for me, or I wouldn't do it. But
Yeah, yeah.
so podcasting and gaming, I think, and reading. I do a lot of reading also.
Good for
So,
you. I
what's
do too.
your what? Now, you said you read nonfiction, right? Do you have a favorite book?
My favorite book of all time was The Right Stuff. It's about the Mercury astronauts
Mm-hmm.
and where they came from and the training they went through, and then the actual missions that they went on. It's not a real long book, but it's very well written, and the story is fabulous.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, of all the books I've read, that's one that really stands out.
Is that by Tom Wolfe? Looks like.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've read a lot of Tom Wolfe,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and his books tend to be a lot longer than The Right Stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing beats it. I don't think. Partly because it's factual. What
Yeah.
they went through is just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And the bravery of putting yourself into that tiny little capsule. If you've ever been to the Air and Space Museum, they have a capsule there.
Mm-hmm.
You look at it and you think, man, this is really flimsy metal and it's tiny. And you
Mm-hmm.
park yourself on top of a rocket in this thing. No, never mind getting back.
Yeah.
Nobody really knew for sure if they could make it back. They had a pretty good
Mm-hmm.
idea, but nothing was for certain.
Yeah, you
So,
can say like, yeah, you'll make it back in theory, but if you don't really know,
yeah, well, we thought Challenger was going to make it back.
yeah, that's very true. I recently
You
found
never
out that
know.
my grandma was under consideration to be the teacher on the Challenger,
Really?
which was crazy. Yeah, her principal and the school district nominated her, and she did a couple of like interviews and stuff, and ultimately was not selected. But it was just one of those things. It's like I had no idea.
Yeah, well, what an exciting prospect, while she was
Mm-hmm.
in the running. That's really neat. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. Man, whole world was watching for that one. That's heartbreaking. So, what is your favorite life hack, or do you have one?
My favorite.
Life hack, like, um, making sure that you eat a certain thing every day, or some app on your phone that keeps you going, or a
I don't really
habit or
use
something that you
apps. I,
do.
I, I tell you, Mama, I was born too late. My wiring is totally different from yours.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to admit it, but it's true. I just have trouble learning all this stuff and
Yeah.
remembering it. And what I find is when I learn how to do things I really need to do, a lot of times they change after a while. And then I
Mm-hmm.
have to relearn things. And, it just drives me crazy. So I don't have a favorite app. I'm really old fashioned. I read actual printed books. I don't
Mm-hmm.
read anything online. I mean, obviously with emails and stuff like that, I do. But yeah, I'm really not with it. I'm
That's
72.
okay.
I'm
Yeah.
72, and when I was in grammar school, I was not like my grandson who will take pictures with his mother's iPhone and call me up on the iPhone. I wasn't raised with that kind of thing. We
Yeah.
had mail stamps for 4 cents,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a telephone, and that was probably your party line. So, you think about the way people, even your age, uh, or younger, you have been raised with a whole different way of thinking. I
Mm-hmm.
really believe that your brains have been wired differently.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It's like the software is different.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, biologically you're the same, but the software is different because you grasp these things, and there are things that you do intuitively that I have to think about. I have to
Mm-hmm.
figure out what it is. I can't say, well, there's that icon. You think about it, icons are really like learning a whole nother language. It's a whole nother alphabet.
Little
All they are
hieroglyphics.
is, yeah, they are. And you have to be able to decipher what those things mean. And there are more and more of them all the time. So for somebody like you who is used to absorbing that, and you already have a base knowledge of how these things work and what those symbols probably mean, You've got a huge advantage over people like me. In fact, there's a guy I'm friends with. He and I are exactly the same age. He used to be the superintendent of the Department of Public Works for a big city out this way. He and I were on a committee together, and what I discovered is that he and I are exactly the same way. Neither one of us is an unintelligent person,
Mm-hmm.
but we both have the same struggles, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the same way. So anybody who's my age or older who really gets this stuff, my hat is off to them because
Yeah.
somehow they can do it. But I don't think most of us are really comfortable with it.
Yeah.
So as far
Well,
as your at least I didn't ask you what an app was. And I know what
that's
it is. I
true.
just
That's
don't have a
true.
favorite one.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely something that, so I'm a millennial. I was born in 85, and so I didn't grow up with one in my hand like my kids did, but I definitely grew up whenever it came to be. And
Mhm.
I mean, first of all, like watching my kids just be able to pick something up and do something with it, I'm like, that would take me a while to figure out. But I could figure it out because I did grow up where it was developing, and so I kind of understand a little bit more about, oh, well, that's like this used to be, but they've taken it to the next level. And my kids are like, what are you talking about?
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, it is. It's a whole different learning, a whole different kind of thought pattern and everything. So, oh yeah, and Bite Mark says they've done studies on the language you speak, changing your thought patterns. And I think growing up with technology is definitely like knowing another language. I think so too. I definitely do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you
So
have a true crime story or a serial killer story that fascinates you?
I thought about that. I guess I'm not really into that sort of thing, but I watch Dateline once in a while, just
Mhm.
like everybody else does. And I was at a grand jury a few years ago. This was a Superior Court jury, so the cases we heard were the really nasty ones.
Mhm.
Uh, and the first case we got was actually a murder. This woman broke up with her boyfriend. Uh, he killed her. He stabbed her like
Mhm.
29 times, and that they had pictures of her body in the apartment and all that. But they also played recordings from communications that her mother tried to have with her the night that she was killed. And one of the messages was, I'm getting really worried that you're not calling me back, but maybe I've just watched too many Datelines.
Yeah.
So I thought, man, this really was a Dateline.
Yeah.
And she said that because we're all so familiar with the stories that we see there. But this could have been one of those stories. In fact, this guy who killed her, he left her body there for 3 days.
Oh my
He just sat in the
gosh.
living room smoking cigarettes and drinking. And then he finally called the
Oh
cops.
wow.
The cops came, and of course, the last I heard of him is that he was in jail, but he was facing more charges because from jail he was trying to have the DA killed.
Oh my
He thought
gosh.
he thought he was going to hire a hitman to kill the DA from jail,
From jail. And no one would know, of course.
and no one would know. So of course the guy he told in the jail went right to the guards and said, "Guess
Oh
what?"
yeah.
So now he's in trouble. So I mean, there are so many horrible crimes out there,
Mhm.
and they're all bad, unfortunately they're all fascinating in one way or another.
Mhm.
So I guess that would be my story as far as the true crime goes.
Yeah. I mean, it is definitely that mother who's like, maybe I've just watched too many Datelines. Like, it is one of those things that, sometimes having watched a lot of true crime documentaries or having listened to true crime podcasts or watched different movies and stuff, it's like you can pick up on things that you might not otherwise pick up on. And I wonder if because of that she was picking up a little bit of that. But yeah, it's crazy to live through something like that and then be like, wow, this is like being on Dateline, because that story very well could be on Dateline.
Yeah, it could.
Mhm.
That was a bad story.
Mhm.
You know
Yeah.
what? Being on a grand jury like that, you see a lot of stuff, and
Mhm.
we don't live in a metropolis here, but we have more than our share of killings and robberies and you name it. It all happens
Mhm.
here. You don't hear about it for the most part. But being on the jury, they bring you the cases because they can't prosecute them unless we vote to prosecute them.
Right.
So, you go through all this stuff and you think, man, I had no idea there were this many really bad people out there. I mean, people with arsenals in their houses and,
Mhm.
kilos and kilos of cocaine and heroin and you name it. It's pretty scary.
Yeah. Did you just get called up for jury duty and that's what you got assigned to?
What happened is I got called for jury duty. And so I'm checking in. And this officer told me that he said, "Go see that officer down there. She may have an opportunity for you." So she asked me if I wanted to be on the grand jury, and she, I told her no. It's a big commitment for 3 months, and
Yeah.
so I said no. But then, as I thought about it more, I thought, this might actually be kind of an interesting thing to do. So, and plus, I'm retired, so it's not
Mhm.
like I had a job to I had to get away from. So So I went back to her and I told her I changed my mind. I'd like to get on that jury. So of course you still had to go through the judge. But
Yeah.
that's a rubber stamp mainly. But anyway, they apparently wanted me for some reason, because it wasn't everybody that they were making that offer to.
Mhm.
So at first I was pretty impressed with myself. I thought it must be because I'm smart and good looking. It's the kind of
Gotta
person they
be
want to
it.
have on the
It's
grand
gotta be
jury.
it. Yep.
So that was until I get into the grand jury room. There's 22 grand jurors. And I realized that there were only 3 of us that looked like we were over 60. So I
No.
think they wanted the older citizen. Didn't matter who you were, didn't matter your gender, your race, nothing.
Yeah.
It was how smart you were, how good looking you were. It
Mhm.
was, are you old enough to fit this characteristic?
Category, yeah.
So that's what happened. But you know what? It was a good experience. It really
Yeah.
was a good experience. The jurors all got to know each other. Uh, there were no bad actors there. Everybody really got along. And even when they disagreed, that was fine. So, yeah, it was a good experience. I'd recommend it.
That's awesome. That sounds really cool. I mean, 3 months is a long time if you're still working or anything, I
Yeah.
work full time. I have 2 kids. I'm a single mom. Like, it would be really challenging for me to do, but, it would be really cool. It'd be cool to be able to do something like that.
Someday.
Yeah, someday one day when I'm retired, I'll check the
There you
box for
go.
them here. So, our topic tonight is diabetes, and we're also going to talk about mental health and how it relates to diabetes as well. So, can you share a little bit about your personal journey with diabetes?
Yeah, I tell you briefly my story, but then I'd like to tell you why I started doing this as far as
Absolutely.
trying to dispel the misinformation out there. Um, I got type 1 diabetes when I was 29 years old. It used to be called
Wow.
juvenile diabetes, but people of any age can get it, and that's what happened
Hmm.
to me. I got it in 1981, so now this is my 43rd year with diabetes, and I've done well with it. I've really tried to control it well. Nobody does it perfectly, but I've done it well enough that
Yeah.
I'm still in good health. So I know what it takes to manage this disease, and it's not easy. It's not easy for type 2s either. This is a very difficult disease, and you really need to know what you're doing in order to do it well. So, I could tell stories about it, but I'd rather not talk about myself at this point. I would like to tell you why I'm doing this because that in
Absolutely.
itself is a pretty good story. I was in Chicago a number of years ago when Ron Santo was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. I didn't know who Ron Santo even was until that week. And there were stories about him in all the local papers and on the TV and everything. It turned out that he was also a type 1 diabetic back in the 1960s. Back then, we didn't know that much about diabetes. There really was a big stigma then, and there still is today. But he didn't want to tell anybody that he had type 1 diabetes because he was afraid the Cubs would fire him if they found
Oh,
out.
wow.
So here he was, he's taking insulin injections and keeping it quiet. So nobody knew. Uh, I'm going to give you a little background about diabetes before I continue because you need this for the story to make sense.
Yeah.
With people who use insulin, like type 1 diabetics do, or even those who take certain type 2 medications, you can have a very low blood sugar. We know that the damage long term is caused by high blood sugars, but low blood sugars present a different problem.
Hmm.
What happens is that your brain takes glucose directly from the blood. It doesn't store it like other tissues in the body do. So when there isn't enough glucose in the blood, the brain starts to go haywire. Because that controls your whole body, things start happening. You can start sweating, you can get shaky, you can lose your coordination. Your eyesight can get funky to where you're seeing double or triple. A whole wide variety of things can happen because the
Hmm.
brain is not getting the energy it needs. But having explained that, Santos in a game one day. It's the bottom of the ninth. The Cubs are down by two. There's two outs, and Santa was in the on deck circle. So he's in the circle, then he starts feeling low blood sugar coming on. He can't go back to the dugout to eat his candy bar to raise his blood sugar. So he's in the on deck circle just praying that the guy at the plate will make an out to retire the side so he doesn't have to get up to bat. Well, the guy walks. So now his base is loaded. Two outs, down by two, last of the ninth. Santo walks up to the plate. He said he looked up, he was seeing triple. There were three pitchers,
Oh,
three
wow.
scoreboards, 30 some odd people standing in the field. So the pitcher wound up and threw the ball, and it looked like it had a slinky attached to the back of it. So he took a wild cut at it, connected, and put it out of the park for a walk-off grand slam home run. He made it,
Wow.
he made it around the bases and back to the dugout, grabbed his Snickers bar, and nobody was the wiser for years later. He kept the story to himself. So I read that and I thought, man, what a great story. But then I came home and started telling that story to people, and that's when I realized how badly most people understand diabetes. They really don't know much about it,
Hmm.
which wasn't terribly surprising, I guess, because most people don't have diabetes. But the thing that got me was they would ask me about type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
And when I looked into it, it turned out that much of what I believed about type 2 diabetes was wrong.
Mm.
I thought, well, man, if I've had type 1 for all this time and I've got this deep a misunderstanding about type 2, and our society has a serious problem because if I have it all wrong, chances are most everybody else does too.
Hmm.
And sure enough, as I've been out there talking to more and more people, that is the truth. People blame diabetics for getting the disease.
Yep.
They criticize them when they think they're doing something that's not quite right. There's a whole bad package of stuff that comes with having a diabetes diagnosis. And that's the reason I'm doing this. I realize that nobody else is trying to straighten this thing out,
Hmm.
but it is a problem. And as I talk to my doctor, uh, I've got, I've had a couple of endocrinologists, and I see a certified diabetes education specialist. They're both very knowledgeable about diabetes. And I've had lots of heart to heart talks with them, and they agree. There's a stigma out there, and they tell me the medical profession is responsible for a lot of it. And they're right. So it's a big hill to climb, but what I'm doing is making this my retirement project. And I'm talking to people like you so I
Hmm.
can go over the heads of everybody and just talk about the facts.
Yeah.
So far it's been really fun, Mama. You mentioned liking doing podcasts. I
Hmm.
do too. I really do. I talk to people like you who are interested in hearing what I have to say. You transmit the message to other people, and who knows where it goes. This is
Hmm.
just a great way to reach people. Up until COVID, I was giving classes that are based on the things that I'm talking about on the podcast, and I've learned an awful lot from those people. That's another beautiful thing. You're going to talk about your grandfather. Almost always, when I talk to a podcaster, they have a story that
Hmm.
they can relate directly to, and that's where I build my knowledge. Get a lot of interesting takes on diabetes and what people have put up with and done to deal with it. So it's a benefit for me that way too.
Yeah.
So long and short of it, that's why I'm here.
Yeah. No, I like that because it's one of those things you can have a chronic illness and something that from the outside it's like, okay, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, both diabetes, right? Well, yeah, but there's some differences, and if you don't know what they are and you have one of those, how can you expect someone who doesn't have either of those to know what those are at all, or to have any understanding and extend any understanding to anyone else who does? And I really feel like a lot of the blame for getting diabetes is such a hard thing to overcome in today's society, even still, even with, the understanding that that's not necessarily something you can control. So what are some of the common misconceptions that people have that you encounter quite often about
Well,
diabetes?
the biggest one is about weight. People
Mm-hmm.
think that you get diabetes or type 2 diabetes because you're overweight.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Centers for Disease Control tells us that 70% of us are overweight, and only 10% of us get diabetes. So that's 1 out of 7
Mm-hmm.
overweight people who get diabetes. Um, we all know overweight people who don't have diabetes. We also mostly know people who are thin and in shape and eat right and exercise who do get diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, there's something more going on here than just you're fat, so you got diabetes.
Yeah.
In fact, being overweight is not what causes it. It comes into play in managing it later on, but it's not what initiates it. With both type 1 and type 2, which are different diseases, they both start with the genetic predisposition. And when a person encounters something in the environment that triggers it, that's when they get the condition.
Mm-hmm.
With type 1, it's an autoimmune disease. When that gets triggered, the body's own cells attack the insulin producing cells in the pancreas and it kills them off. So this can take a few months, but it happens fairly quickly. When that happens, you no longer produce insulin, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a problem. Um, type 2, there's a different problem. The underlying cause there is called insulin resistance, and it means that your pancreas produces insulin, but your body doesn't use it efficiently, and it gets worse and worse and worse. Let me back up. I should have explained this before I differentiated between the two. The way the normal body works is that when you eat food, it gets digested into glucose.
Mm-hmm.
Glucose is just a form of sugar. It winds up in your bloodstream, and when it's in the blood, the pancreas produces a hormone called insulin. The insulin acts as a key. It goes with the glucose in the blood to the cells, and it acts as a key that unlocks those cells to allow the glucose to enter. So two things happen. First, the cells get the glucose they need for energy, but it also leaves the bloodstream. So that's what
Mm-hmm.
controls the blood sugar in normal people. As I mentioned, with type 1s, we don't produce insulin anymore. So we have to take insulin injections because it's destroyed in digestion. So injection is the only way to take it. With type 2, your cells become resistant to insulin, which means that they need more and more and more insulin to
Mm-hmm.
get the cells open. The result is that the pancreas gets overworked. And over a period of like 8 or 10 years, usually, it gets overworked to the point where it can no longer keep up. So they have to have a shortage of insulin. So that's the difference between the two, that they both result in high blood sugars, but they really are different diseases.
Right.
But I've had people ask me whether I have the good kind or the bad kind. And I think what they mean by that is, do you take shots or can you have pills? Well, yeah, I take shots, and type 2s can get by with pills. Um, but a well controlled type 1, which I have been, is in far better shape than a poorly controlled type 2.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have type 2. 95% of cases are type 2. But these people suffer complications from high blood sugar every bit as badly as type 1s do if they're not in
Mm-hmm.
control. I'll give you an example. Um, we've touched on the stigma. When I got diagnosed, I did not want people thinking that I was weaker than other people. I didn't want them
Mm-hmm.
worrying about my health. I didn't want them worrying about whether I could do things competently. That That was some things that could be dangerous in the line of work. It's just the nature of the beast. And I didn't want people questioning whether I was going to go south on them for whatever reason. So I
Yeah.
didn't tell anybody. If you really had a need to know, I told you, but I also told you to be quiet about it. Well, this guy had worked for me for probably 30 years. I hadn't seen him in a long time, and I talked to him on the telephone probably 10 years ago. Turned out that he was in a wheelchair. He
Hmm.
told me he had type 2 diabetes and he didn't take care of it. So after a while, he couldn't take the pain anymore. So he went to the hospital and they took one leg on one day and the other one on the next day.
Oh, wow.
So now he's lost both his legs and he's in a wheelchair. He told me that if I ever got diabetes, to make sure I take care of it. Well, he was one of the people who didn't have a need to know, so he didn't know. But, Mama, when I think about this whole stigma thing, I think that illustration probably shows the most dangerous aspect of this stigma. Because diabetics very often don't talk about it because we don't
Hmm.
want to put up with the static from it.
Yeah.
Now, what would happen if Jerry had known that I had diabetes? Maybe 30 years ago, he would have come to me and said, Chet, I got diabetes. What can you tell me about it? And I
Hmm.
could have helped him. But by and large, diabetics aren't like that. Nobody wants the static. Nobody wants to be looked at like, well, you're a few pounds overweight. It's no wonder you're diabetic. You know what?
Right.
70% of people are overweight.
Hmm.
And they're not getting diabetes. Um, but that's the grief that comes with it that you just don't need. It's really a crime because diabetes is a very dangerous disease.
Hmm.
And we really can use support. When I was doing the classes, one of the best things that would happen to me is that the person taking the class would come to me later and tell me that the best thing I told them was that they didn't cause this. You can just see the guilt and the shame melt off their faces. They
Hmm.
smile. It's like they've been carrying this burden because they've been beating themselves up for years because they thought they did something, whatever it was, probably just carrying a few extra pounds that made them get diabetes.
Yeah.
So I know your focus really is mental health. That does something to your mental health.
It really
When you're on
does.
this, this guilt and shame trip for all those years, and not getting the support from peers that really could help you,
Hmm.
that doesn't help your mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. It really doesn't. And that what you're describing reminds me of, I had an interview with a gentleman named Mike Chapman, and he was talking about childhood abuse. And that was one of the things that he always said to the support groups that he would go to is that one of the first things he would say to these young kids who had been abused was, you did nothing to cause this. This was out of your control. It wasn't you. And he said the
Mhm.
same thing, like their faces change. They're like, no one's ever said that to me before. And it's really touching. And I think a lot of people really, there is a huge stigma, especially for type 2 diabetes. And the misunderstanding is massive, and that absolutely affects your mental health. I mean, it has to, because if you're living under, oh, if I tell so and so that I have diabetes, then it's going to be a conversation about, well, what'd you do? How'd you get it? Like, and it's not something that you can catch. You can't catch diabetes. You can catch a
Yeah,
cold, but you can't catch diabetes.
yeah. I find, by and large, I find that the weight is the thing, though.
Yeah.
Or you eat too much sugar. Because
Yeah.
yeah, let me tell you, there are the. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people about diabetes. That puts me in a unique position because most people don't talk about diabetes. But
Mhm.
through the classes I've given, the people I've gotten to know, I meet people who aren't diabetic who will drink like 2 liters of sugared soda
Yeah.
every day. I mean, there's people out there drinking massive amounts of soda,
Yep.
and that the sugar content is unbelievable. Now,
Hmm.
that's not going to give you diabetes, but if you're a person who's drinking that soda and you happen to get diabetes, if you don't make the connection, somebody else will. Oh,
Yeah.
well, what do you want? You were drinking all that sugar soda. Of course you got
Yep.
diabetes. It really has nothing to do with it. So, a part of what I'm trying to do is with the general public, I want them to understand what's going on here so you give
Mhm.
diabetics respect. But the other thing is to teach diabetics the basics of the disease so they know and they can defend themselves. So
Yeah.
many diabetics, like the people who thank me for telling them that they didn't, get it themselves. Every diabetic should know that. Should be able to
Mhm.
stand up for yourself and say, I didn't bring this on myself.
Yeah.
And by the way, the thing that happens is that people will criticize you for the food you eat. Go to a Christmas party, pick up a sugar cookie and see what happens.
Mhm.
That doesn't happen all the time, but it happens often enough that somebody will maybe give you the evil eye or they'll ask you, should you really be eating that? And the
Mhm.
fact is that diabetics can eat sugar. It's just a question of how much and when, and
Yeah.
you may have a plan for how to knock it down afterwards. But yeah, I would like I'd like our whole society to understand diabetes well enough that the
Mhm.
stigma would disappear and we would get support from fellow diabetics and also from the general public.
Mhm.
Now, I would not ever equate diabetes with cancer, but you look at almost any other disease out there, and people get respect for fighting it.
Yeah.
They don't get criticized for getting it. They get respect for fighting it. And it ought to be that simple with diabetics too.
Mhm.
Uh, but it's we're a long way from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, diabetes, like any other chronic illness, can be really challenging to live with on kind of a day-to-day basis. So, what if someone were to come to you and say, "What wellness or coping strategy could I use to maintain both my physical health with diabetes and my mental health with diabetes?" What are some things you would tell them to try out?
Well, the first thing is to understand what causes your blood glucose level to change. Very simply, there are good things to do and bad things to do. And very simply, it's bad if you eat a lot of carbohydrates
Mhm.
because, believe it or not, carbohydrates, which include starches like potato and bread, 1 gram of those starches digests into 1 gram of sugar.
Mhm.
So when you're eating those starches, you are eating sugar. So you got to be aware of that. You know that eating a lot of sugar and carbohydrates will raise your blood sugar. You know that being sedentary allows it to stay high. You
Mhm.
also know that if you cut down on your carbohydrates and are physically active, which basically means not being a couch potato, doesn't mean going to the gym every day. It means just getting up and walking around a little bit. Um, if you do more of those good things, lower carbohydrate and activity versus high carbohydrate and inactivity, you're well on the way to controlling your blood sugar.
Mhm.
And it's that simple. And a lot of people do it without medication at all. So that's one thing. The other thing, and this gets more to the mental aspect of it, is that you've got this disease you didn't ask for, but you've got it. You're not going to get rid of it. It's not going to be cured. It's not going to go away. So get used to the fact that this is how your life has turned out.
Mhm.
And it's not impossible. You can still live a long, healthy life. Just get the attitude that this is something you have to do. In my case, I take insulin. It's a little more involved in my case, I guess. I mean, I've got a pump now, but until then, for years and years, I was taking 4 or 5 shots a day.
Mhm.
Uh, but after a while, this is just the way it is.
Yeah.
I don't obsess about it. I'm not going to change it. So you do what you got to do. I've got a wife and 2 kids. You've got bigger responsibilities than moaning about diabetes. A lot of people also think that unless you've got perfect control and your blood sugars are down in the normal range, you're really in trouble. And the fact is that we can tolerate higher levels of blood sugar. It just can't be too high for too much of the time. We're always going
Mhm.
to have fluctuations, but you just can't let it be out of control for a long period of time. So you do have some latitude there. And people beat themselves up unnecessarily because they don't think their control is good enough. When it might be, and the doctors can tell you that. There are tests they can give you that'll tell you what your average blood sugars have been, and uh, and they'll give you advice. So it's something you can deal with.
Mhm.
But it's something that unfortunately people really freak out over, and it's understandable. I mean,
Yeah.
but part of the problem too. If people understood it better and knew that there were ways that you could handle it, they're not easy, but you can do it. You know, and have a better attitude about diabetics who are fighting it. And maybe understand better what they go through. But
Mhm.
one other thing, one example I use for people when we're talking about carbohydrates is when I eat food, I always take a minute just to look at the food. I always ask myself, where are the carbohydrates coming from? I was at a dinner one time. It was in a Polish restaurant, and I ordered the Polish platter. The guy
Mhm.
next to me looks at it and says, "You gonna eat all that?" 'Cause he knew I was diabetic. "You gonna eat all that?" And I said, "Let me tell you what I'm gonna do. There's kielbasa there, which is sausage. There's protein. There's no carbohydrate in that. Uh, we've got lumpies, which are stuffed cabbage.
Mhm.
About half of that is rice. The rest of it's pork. Rice is a carbohydrate. Pork is a protein. The cabbage is very low carbohydrate. So that's not so bad.
Mhm.
You've got pierogies, which uh, they're just stuffed turnovers. They've got usually,
Delicious.
you like pierogies?
Oh,
I love
yeah.
them. Yeah, cheese. Yeah, they come in with a variety of stuffings, but I like pierogies. So I like them, and the portion's not that great. So I'm going to eat that. It's a carbohydrate. It's
Mhm.
going to turn into sugar. I get that. But what I'm going to do is trade off the rye bread that I would have eaten instead. So the bread, I'm not eating that. I have the pierogies instead. So so that's what I did. You know,
Mhm.
I'm sure he observed me eating, and sure enough, there was a piece of bread left over afterwards. The following day, he asked me what my blood sugar was that morning, and it was 114, which was perfect. You know, I I know what I'm doing,
Yeah.
and every other diabetic can know what they're doing too. And really, it's a matter of understanding the role carbohydrates play, but also educating yourself as to what they are. You have to
Mhm.
recognize what they are and also what they aren't, because you can eat eggs, fish, meat, turkey. I mean, there are a lot of things out there that you can fill up on that are not going to raise your blood sugar at all.
Mhm.
So that's the kind of thing you need to know. And once you know those things, the mental aspect all of a sudden gets a lot better because what you've done is remove the uncertainty. Now
Mhm.
you're not just guessing at what this is going to do to my blood sugar. You pretty well know what it's going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, my grandmother on the other side of the family has diabetes still, and she's very much like she controls it with her diet and with her activity. I don't know
Yep.
that she's on insulin. I haven't ever seen her do a shot. I know whenever she first got her diagnosis, she was like, "I'm working with my doctor. We're going to really monitor everything and make sure that through diet and exercise, everything's going to be fine." So I don't know that has changed or anything, but she does definitely make those choices at our family gatherings and everything. She makes those choices to say, like, I'm going to do this or do that, or I'm going to eat this, but I'm not going to eat that kind of thing. And then my grandfather on my dad's side, his was very much, he monitored all the time. And he did insulin shots pretty much before every meal or after every meal. I don't remember which. But it was never a big deal. It was just like that's the thing that grandpa has to do. Like,
Yeah.
okay, whatever. That's just grandpa. And it never bothered me, I guess, because I'm not afraid of needles and stuff. So that never bothered me. But yeah, it was really interesting whenever, because I grew up with my grandfather always having had diabetes, and for my grandmother to get a diagnosis later in life when I was already, I think I might have already been an adult when she got that diagnosis. I think I was. Um, it was interesting to see it kind of from the perspective of the beginning of a diagnosis versus you've just always had this. And the differences
Well,
between,
yeah, I'm
you know,
pretty impressed that both of them understood what to do and were
mm-hmm,
actually doing it.
yeah.
One of the things that I show people is I have a Thanksgiving list. I have all the foods that come with Thanksgiving. We start with the turkey, and you go to the stuffing and the vegetables and the
Mm-hmm,
pies, the cranberry sauce, and I rank them in order of the carbohydrate content. At the very top is turkey or ham, or for whatever meat you eat. It's all no carbohydrate.
Mhm.
Unless sometimes the ham people get sneaky and they put sugar in the ham. I don't know why they do that, but
Mhm.
sometimes they do. But the point is that you can look at this whole list and say, okay, this is the stuff that I ought to fill up on. Want to have some stuffing? Great. You want some cranberry sauce? Don't eat much of it. That's all sugar. But you can construct a pretty filling, good tasting meal.
Yeah.
It's not going to raise your blood sugar tremendously.
Mhm.
But if you're not aware of that, and you sit down and the first thing you do is grab a big mountain of stuffing and a big mountain of mashed potato, throw the gravy on it, and that's the most of what you're eating. Well,
Right.
your blood sugar is not going to be very good. So that's the kind of practical thing that you really have to know.
Mhm.
I really do think it's cool that your grandparents were aware enough to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's impressive.
I love that you brought up the honey on the ham also because Bitemark just put a really relevant comment in the chat. So she says it's getting harder and harder to know though. When we were restricting carbs for a while, we went to Buffalo Wild Wings and planned to get their naked tenders, which are grilled chicken. And when we checked the nutrition facts, there were 34 grams of carbs in them, which is crazy for what you think of as like just straight up chicken. But depending on how they're sauced, I guess. And also, you can still put like cornstarch and stuff on grilled chicken. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to know if you're going somewhere out to eat elsewhere. It can be really hard to know, well, how many carbs does this have in it? I do love that places are required to provide that nutritional information though, because you might have never known that was there. But yeah, it can be. It can be really difficult if you're not preparing the food or you don't know who prepared the food. It can be really difficult to know how many grams of carbs, how many grams of sugar, and obviously they're chicken tenders, so probably not much fiber in there. But
Probably
but yeah,
not. No.
that can be really
There isn't
difficult.
much protein in there either. What it really is this sauce. I mean,
Yeah.
what do you
Yep.
what do you really get in a chicken wing? I
Hmm.
know they're tasty and all that, but yeah, as a healthy food, they're not really very high on the list.
Yeah.
But you never know where these carbs are going to be. I went into a convenience store and I bought a bottle of vitamin water. I figured vitamins and water. How can you go wrong? I took a taste and it was sweet. I looked at the nutrition label, it had 25 grams of sugar in it.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah, I mean, I thought, what's up with that? Vitamin water? No, it was clear. It wasn't even like it was colored. Uh, so, yeah, you just don't know. And you're right
Yeah.
about the restaurant labels. They are really priceless.
Hmm.
Um, you know, uh, I once went into a restaurant and they got the chicken wrap. How far wrong can you go with a chicken wrap? This is, years ago before we had the continual glucose monitors. So you're kind of on
Hmm.
your own to guess at what your blood sugars were. Um, but I felt like my blood sugar was getting really high. So
Hmm.
when I went home, I checked it and it was really high. I went to the restaurant website and sure enough, it had chicken, it had lettuce, and it had the wrap, which was thin. But the salad dressing in it was just all sugar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wish I had known that before I ordered it. I thought I was doing
Hmm.
the right thing, but you know, lesson learned.
Yeah. Yeah, those dressings can be a real sneaky spot. So, how does stress impact diabetes, and what are some effective strategies for managing stress for people living with diabetes?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think knowing how this disease operates and what you need to do to control blood sugars, that's a big part of it. Um, because it does remove the uncertainty. So you're not
Hmm.
just willy nilly eating whatever and not understanding it. It kind of puts you in a situation where you're playing with fire and you just don't know, when it's going to burn you and when it's not, you
Yeah.
know? So you have to know. Um, the other, as I mentioned, is just understanding that you're going to have this for the rest of your life. But that you do have latitude and uh, you can get past it. But on the other hand, stress Maybe I'm not as affected by this as other people because I've had it for so long, and everything I do is just such a second nature to me, like your grandfather probably. You don't think about it, so it doesn't stress you anymore.
Mhm.
But people who just get diagnosed, they're under a lot of stress
Yeah.
because they really don't know what they're in for. And of course, they think the worst, and they really don't often get educated well enough to understand what they're up against. Unfortunately, unless you're going to an endocrinologist or a certified diabetes educator, you don't get the time with your doctor that he needs to explain what's really going on. And that's also what I do. I wrote the diabetes book to explain the nuts and bolts of it so that everybody could understand it. Once you do that, you help yourself with the stress. Um, and part of it too is that the stigma. If we could get rid of that stigma, people wouldn't feel that as badly about having diabetes as they do because
Mhm.
they believe all the wrong things, just like everybody else does. They really think they brought it on themselves and got the guilt and the uncertainty, and it's a lifelong thing, and they go blind, and all this stuff roils around in their minds, and it's going to keep doing that if they don't educate themselves. So I think to handle stress, educating yourself or getting an endocrinologist or the CDE who will help you makes a big difference. The reason I mention those two is that these are experts in diabetes.
Mhm.
And not only that, but they will spend an hour with you. I see my people 4 times a year, and each time I spend an hour with them. That is a long time, and you can really get good knowledge, not just about the disease in general, but about yourself in particular,
Yeah.
because they will come up with strategies for you. They can also support you because they see a lot of people who are in the same boat,
Mhm.
and they see a lot of people who do very well with it, so they can help support them that way. I think you need somebody like that. Diabetes is not a disease that you're gonna manage it on your own.
Mhm.
You won't. There's too much to it. It's too complicated. It's too variable. Um, our bodies change, so things don't stay the same. I mean, you need a medical professional who knows what they're talking about, and that's what those people are. Now, another thing about stress is there's a thing called diabetes burnout, and it happens when people have had diabetes for a certain amount of time. They get tired of dealing with it. They're tired of stress that comes from all the things I just talked about, and they just give up. And they figure, I've had enough. I'm not going to do this anymore. Well, that's not good. If
Yeah.
you're really not going to treat it, you are going to have really high blood sugars, and they will kill you.
Mhm.
They literally will kill you. That guy I mentioned who lost his legs, I went to his wake 2 years after I talked to him.
Mm.
He had died of diabetes complications. So this disease will kill you. Um, so it's not easy, which is another reason that diabetics deserve respect.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I'm glad that you brought up the complications also because a lot of those complications and the fatigue and the just saying like I'm done. I'm not going to deal with this anymore. Whatever will be, right? Which
Yeah.
means your diabetes is going to go unchecked. Essentially is
Yeah.
what that means because it doesn't just go away just because you're ignoring it. So, what support systems or resources are available for those who are facing those complications to help them kind of maintain their physical and mental well-being? Are there groups for support or what's out there?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And that's something else. You have other groups with all kinds of ailments, and they do have support groups,
Hmm.
but diabetes groups don't exist. At least not that I'm aware of. There's probably some somewhere, but not around where I live.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's really not an option that is available here in most places. Um, you could just see your doctors, see your CDEs and your doctors, and learn from them, and hopefully your family members will learn about it. Uh, Frankly, you could buy the diabetes book and read about it. You
Mhm.
might check my website in a month. I have some videos that'll be up also, and those I made them short. There are two of them, so they're both 25 minutes long. One explains all of the fallacies about diabetes, why it really starts, why you shouldn't feel guilty about it, why people should respect diabetics who fight it. And I'm trying to reach not just diabetics. I want to reach anybody who cares about them,
Mhm.
whether it's their spouse or their partner or family member, whomever, and also the general public, because we need to get the public educated for this to change. So my hope is that with the videos, that people will not only buy them and watch them themselves, but that they'll share it with their civic organizations or churches or book clubs or whatever it might be. So I'm not giving them away. They're $9.99, so
Mhm.
I have expenses, but I really want to get these things out there.
Yeah.
And if we can get I figure $9.99, if you have a church group with 20 people in it, 50 cents a piece, you can probably afford that.
Right.
But my goal is to have people watch these videos and then talk to other people about it.
Mhm.
If people are talking about diabetes, say, well, look, this is what I learned. This is what's really going on here. And if you want to learn more, you can get this cheap video and you can watch it with your friends,
Mhm.
and try to get it out that way. I think that's a more accessible way to do it than asking people to read books because I don't think the book reading public is as big as it once was.
Mhm.
So, the quick video I think will work. Plus, I know in group settings, I've spoken to a lot of groups, Rotary clubs, that sort of thing. And what I found is that I'll give a 20-minute presentation and there'll be a 40-minute discussion afterwards.
Mhm.
So that's what it'll do. It'll promote discussions. So, whatever group you're with, you can count on having a good meeting, where people will open up about it. So that's a tool that I'm going to have out there soon. In
Yeah.
fact, what I'll do is I'll get in touch with you, Mama, and let
Yeah,
you know
that'd
when
be
it's out.
great. I'd love to
Yeah,
share it. Absolutely.
yeah. In fact, with all the podcasts I've been on, I'm going to do the same thing. I'll get you a
Yeah.
copy and see what you think.
Yeah, that'd be great. I would love to share that and just kind of put out there that it's available and everything. Because I really do think that so when I first got diagnosed, really it started when I first got diagnosed with postpartum depression. I didn't really talk about it a lot with my first pregnancy. With my second pregnancy, I talked about it a little more. And it was amazing just how many people would say, like, oh my gosh, I've been there. Even my own mother, I had no idea. She's like, oh yeah. So it's the more that you're willing to talk about it, the more open you are. It doesn't necessarily have to be this is a diabetes support group. The more that you talk about it, the more you're willing to be open about it, the more people are going to be willing to open up to you about it as well and say like, oh, I have a loved one, or I myself, or this and that, and even asking questions and engaging in conversation, I feel like is something that can be tremendously helpful if you can get past the stigma around it, which kind of leads me to my next question. And that's, we've been talking about these stigmas, and we've been talking about that there's a societal stigma that's out there, and we know that that contributes to a lot of the challenges with just being open about having diabetes and that kind of thing. What steps can an individual take to combat that stigma, whether they have diabetes or not? What's something that people can do?
What I'm hoping they will do is after they view the programs and they have their discussion with whoever their group is, and they all understand how bad problem the stigma is, that they will go back to their workplace or to their families or their friends, and they'll say, "That's what I just did. I just saw this movie about diabetes, and you wouldn't believe the facts." And let me tell you, and it's not like you have to know a whole lot. What
Mm-hmm.
I'm presenting is really the basics in a very understandable, clear way. Once they understand those facts, they can say, diabetes starts because of genetics,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why not all overweight people become diabetic.
Yeah.
That's why so many thin people do get diabetes. Now it all starts to come together. And that's the beginning of it. And if you want to learn more, take a look at this 25-minute video. You won't believe it. So that's what I'm hoping will happen, and the word will start to spread that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as I said, these aren't expensive, and they're deliberately that way so that it's very accessible. My wife belongs to a book club. It's got 10 people in there. For them to, I mean, they're buying the books, right? They
Yeah.
can all spring for 50 cents to watch this, and they'll have a good time doing it.
Yeah.
So that's really what I think we can do to get rid of the stigma. And um, the medical profession, also, a lot of people who aren't trained in diabetes believe the same false things that everybody else does.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a real problem. Um, but I'm hoping that they will be open enough to change their minds too, because it's not because they're bad people or
Yeah.
that they enjoy persecuting diabetics, is that they just really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But if they even go to the American Diabetes Association's website, you go to the section that talks about genetics, and it says right there, both types start when a genetic predisposition encounters an environmental trigger. It's right there in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not making this stuff up. You want
Yeah.
to verify it? Great. Uh, but then, if you can get the medical people to get it, excuse me, maybe the same dynamic will happen there, where
Mm-hmm.
they talk to their peers. Get some guy who's a cardiac guy in his group. And maybe he says, "Did you know this about diabetes?" And
Mm-hmm.
somebody would probably say, "Yeah, I did." But know, who knows how it goes? Mama, there's nothing better than word of mouth.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And everybody likes to share information with other people, especially when they think it's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this is.
Yeah. I know that depression is often linked with diabetes as well. So, how do you address the unique challenges that are faced whenever you have diabetes, and then you're also dealing with something mental health related like depression or anxiety or something like that? Is there anything that is recommended for those with diabetes if they're facing mental health challenges as well?
I don't I don't know if this is anything specific. I would think that a mental health professional would be well versed enough in diabetes to help. It's not the only chronic disease out there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably some common elements between, people's reaction to every challenge like this. Um, I do know that the doctor wrote a book called Diabetes Burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really wanted to learn more, I don't recall he had any specific recommendations for professionals to see, but it's worth reading the book. If you're really depressed about diabetes, you'll find out that you're not the only one. And it's a very common thing. And frankly, it's not hard to understand why. I mean, you're
Mm-hmm.
saddled with this thing. Literally, you have to deal with this 24/7, 365 for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
At least with many other conditions, there's a beginning and there's an end. With this, there is no end. There isn't even hope for an end,
Yeah.
at least not at this point. So, I mean, if you want to get depressed about something, this is the kind of thing you could feel justified getting depressed about.
Yeah.
But you just have to overcome it. It's hard,
Mm-hmm.
but you have no choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's something that's out of your control. And you were talking about it earlier, where it's just you don't necessarily have that control and you don't always have all the information. So I feel like it maybe lends itself a little bit to something like depression, where you get into a spiral and then it's hard to kind of overcome. But I'm glad that you mentioned therapists, because it's really important to acknowledge that, yes, you can have your endocrinologist, you can have your regular doctor, which, by the way, I did not know that an endocrinologist would spend an hour with you. That's amazing. I'm lucky if I get like 20 minutes whenever I go for my annual with my doctor. So that's incredible. But But yeah, I mean, just being willing to add a therapist to your health providers, I feel like could have such a big impact for any chronic illness
Mhm.
that you're facing. If you're feeling some kind of way about it, if you're feeling anxious about it, if you're feeling depressed about it, it's something that you can just add a therapist to that if you have the ability to.
Yeah, well, life is hard. And if
Hmm.
you have a chronic illness on top of it, it makes life even harder.
Yeah.
So, I think getting a professional is a good idea.
Hmm. Absolutely. And you've mentioned a couple times kind of the relationships and how one person can talk to another person who's in a relationship. So, how can someone who's in a relationship who has diabetes, how can they effectively communicate with their partner or their loved one about the emotional challenges that they're facing, either when they first get diagnosed or even if they've been diagnosed for a long time? What do those conversations look like?
I really don't know. Um, I, to be honest with you, I was shocked when I got my diabetes diagnosis. Well, actually, I wasn't that shocked. I'll tell you what happened. I was on a business trip and I got really, really thirsty.
Hmm.
I got really, really dry. So I went to a store and bought some orange juice and I drank that and it got even drier. I barely talked during this business meeting. So a few weeks later, I went to Blue Cross on business. They had some pamphlets in the waiting room for common diseases. So I just happened to pick up the diabetes one. And I had every symptom except the ones that applied to women. So I figured, well, I guess that explains why I'm so parched.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that your body tries to get rid of the sugar in your blood through excessive urination. So whatever fluids are in your body, gets evacuated like immediately. Um, so I did this. I wasn't even seeing a doctor at the time. So I called this guy up and I went in. He said, so what brings you here? I said, well, I think I've got diabetes. He gives me this look like, yeah, you and every other hypochondriac who wanders in here he knows what they've got, right? So he took some blood, came back, and he said, you've got diabetes. And so that was that. So it wasn't like the doctor came out of the blue and told me. I really
Yeah.
pretty much knew that's what I had. But I guess I'm just not really an excitable person in the first place. I mean, I have emotions, but it's just, you accept it and move on. Life has all kinds of challenges. And I just kind of looked at it that, well, this is a big one, but
Yeah.
that's all it is. It's a challenge. But I understand that other people aren't that way, especially when they've been blindsided by it. They
Hmm.
think their things are going just fine, and the doctor tells them that. They really think they're in serious trouble, which they can be unless they learn how to deal with it.
Hmm.
So I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. I mean, anytime you're in a situation where you're having to communicate something with a partner, I feel like it doesn't hurt. Again, if you need to involve a therapist or something, I think that that's perfectly fine. But just being open and honest with your loved ones about it. Like, I can't imagine if my grandfather had not communicated that he had diabetes and I would see him doing the monitoring, doing the shots and everything. Like, I feel like his open communication, but he was very open about pretty much everything. So,
Well, you're you are right about that. Um, you have got to be open with people close to you.
hmm.
Absolutely. My wife is my always a good cook. She cooks balanced meals, always
Hmm.
has. And I tell her every once in a while that the reason I'm here is because of her cooking. That's not totally true, but it's a huge help. If
Hmm.
you're eating, healthy meals and she's aware of carbohydrates and all the rest of it, that is a fabulous help.
Hmm.
So, but there again, those people need to know what you are dealing with, and they're more than happy to help if they know what to do.
Yeah.
And of course, that's another aspect of getting the information out there.
Hmm.
Because right now, there's bad information out there all over. You just don't know what to believe unless you know the basic facts. They have these videos that come out every once in a while where there's a miracle cure for diabetes. I just saw one a little while ago. It's kind of a little hobby of mine where I see them and I look at them. They usually follow the same format where some guy says, like this last guy, said he discovered the cure to diabetes in a remote village on a tropical island mountaintop
Hmm.
somewhere in the South Pacific, right? And this thing works. But you better buy it now before the pharma companies find out and they
Hmm.
shut me down. Now, there's that kind of stuff out there that is absolutely worthless, and yet it's out there. So
Hmm.
people who don't know anything, they take it as the truth. I had a big thing with cinnamon a few years ago. Cinnamon was the magic cure for diabetes. Cinnamon actually does have an impact on blood sugar. It will
Hmm.
lower it some. But I had one person who actually told me that they heard about the cinnamon. And so what they did for breakfast was instead of just having the toast and jam, they had the toast and jam with the cinnamon on top. Well, that did virtually nothing to help with the blood
Yeah.
sugar because the bread's all carbohydrate, the jam is all carbohydrate, and the sprinkle little cinnamon is not going to help you. But this person had read something somewhere and she
Hmm.
thought that was the cure. So, whoever has diabetes or cares about somebody with diabetes and helps them prepare food or whatever, they really need to know.
Hmm.
They need to, because if
Yeah.
they don't, you're hopeless.
Yeah, hiding it doesn't help. Hiding it doesn't help anyone. I mean, and I feel like that's true. You talked at the beginning about making sure that people only knew if they needed to know, right? And that maybe if you had shared with your coworker sooner, maybe he would have come to you before he lost his legs, whenever he got to that point of burnout, right? I feel like if like with a lot of mental health things, the more open you can be about it with people to your comfort level, of course, but the more open you can be about it with people,
Yep.
the more, first of all, you're going to invite conversation. But then, second of all, you're going to just kind of let everyone around you know that, hey, there could be times that I need support, additional support. There could be times that I need a little more understanding.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things really do matter because there were a couple times with my grandfather where his blood sugar tanked, and it was usually on days where he had been more active than usual, and it
Yep.
almost always happened at night. And it would be like, okay, well, you got to get him to drink juice or eat a candy bar or something to get his blood sugar back up
Yep.
to the right level and everything. And if I hadn't known that, because there was one time that we were traveling with my grandparents, and my grandma in panic situations really truly panics and is uh not very, I don't want to say not very helpful, but she's not very helpful
Yeah, right.
in panic situations. And so I knew at the time my oldest was very little. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go to the hotel front desk because the restaurant place was closed, and tell them I need some juice or a Coke or something. And they were like, okay, I've got a Diet Coke right here. I'm like, not diet.
Right.
Give
Right.
me the real thing. But if I hadn't known that, my grandma's in a panic, my grandpa's incoherent. Like it's hard to communicate that kind of thing. So just letting the people around you know that you need some support, that there could be situations that are necessary for you to have that information, I feel like doesn't hurt. I
Knowing that you understand low blood sugar as well as you do, I'm sure you really appreciated the Ron Santos story earlier.
Yes,
But you
yeah.
you knew exactly what that was
Yep.
all about. I mean, this poor guy, he's running around the bases, and people think the big deal is hitting the home run. In fact, the big deal was whether he was going to make it to the dugout or not.
Right. Right.
But you knew that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that story was great. I mean, man, I can't imagine because it truly can be an emergency situation. And
Yeah.
so to know that something like that is happening and then to keep it together and not let anyone else know and still like have this amazing sports moment, right?
Mhm.
and to still wrap it up and no one knows for 30 years, that's incredible. But I also feel like it's incredibly sad too,
Mhm.
because I'm sure he felt really alone in that moment. Like, oh shit, I've got all this stuff that's happening. I've got to keep it together. I got to save face. I got to do all this stuff and I got to get to what I need. And like, imagine
But
if one other person had known and could tell what was happening and could have helped
well,
him, you know?
actually, as he got to know his roommate better, he did tell his roommate because that
Yeah.
way it made it easier to take the injections. And you know,
Yeah.
what are you going to do? Hide from your roommate all the time?
Hmm.
And this guy was good about keeping it a secret. But every once in a while, Santa would start getting a low blood sugar, and one of the symptoms can be that your face gets pale.
Hmm.
And he would tell him, "Hey, Ron, you better eat your candy bar. You're starting to look a little pale." So he was able to help him. Of
Yeah.
course, when Santa's in the on deck circle, it wasn't too much help
Right.
anybody could be at that point. But just imagine what was going through his head. He's rounding first base and wondering, "Am I going to make it all the way around? Am I going to make it
Well,
back to the dugout?"
right.
If he collapses, the cat's out of the bag, right? I mean,
Hmm.
then everybody knows about his diabetes.
Yeah. Speaking of cats, go over here and stay over here. Quit. He is being very obnoxious today. So, you also have the Challenge Diabetes program. So, can you tell us a little bit about that program and how it aims to educate folks and also support both individuals with diabetes and their caregivers?
Well, the program teaches the basic things I've talked about, and then
Hmm.
some. It really does explain the nuts and bolts in a 3-week course.
Hmm.
So once a week, about an hour. Nominally, it's an hour, but they're never that short. There's always questions and conversations that happen. So it's an open ended kind of thing, and it is the closest thing to peer support that I've seen.
Hmm.
It's not a peer support group, but it's a setting in which we do have peer support. Now, I haven't actually been doing those classes. I was doing them here locally before COVID. When COVID hit, everything exploded. All of a sudden,
Yeah.
nobody's going to host the Challenge Diabetes program,
Right.
So I was on like a 3-year hiatus. And then people started asking me if I was going to start doing the program again. But in that time, I realized what the power of podcasts could be. I realized I can reach a lot more people doing this
Hmm.
than I can, doing small groups. There are usually 8 or 10 people in a group. One time I had 25, but that was extraordinarily
That's a
large.
lot. Yeah.
But at the moment, I've got a partner where we have an informal partnership. This woman did the design work on my books. So I've known her for about 10 years. I never met her face to face until last October. We went down to Asheville, North Carolina, where she lives, and so we got together. She became diabetic, and she told me that her doctor prescribed her a medication. She went to the pharmacy, and they were going to charge her $500 for the prescription. And she
Oh
told
my
them to take it
gosh.
back. So she
Yeah.
said, "I did." She said, "I did the design work on your book, but I never actually read it." So I read the book. And I did what you said about watching the carbohydrates and doing moderate physical activity, frequently every day or two. She was doing it every day. She told me she went to her doctor a few months later and her blood sugar was perfect. He gave her a one-man standing ovation, and he asked her what she had done to get her blood sugar down, and she told him diet and exercise. That's all she did. Well, her name is Valley Sharp. And Valley would like to start doing the program down there.
Hmm.
Asheville is in Appalachia. There's a big diabetes program in Appalachia, both among the Scots Irish population down there and the Indian population. American
Hmm.
Indians have a proclivity for getting diabetes. And so once we get the videos done, that's going to be the basis of the program. And she's going to start doing it down there where she will have these in person groups. And we're hoping that I'll continue to do the podcast and she'll generate enough interest in these in-person groups to make that grow too.
Hmm.
So that's where we stand with the Challenge Diabetes program. But Mama, these groups are just wonderful because you get to meet other people. And just like you told me about your grandparents, you hear stories like that. You hear
Hmm.
these are heroic things that these people do. Granddad taking insulin for all those years
Hmm.
and managing well enough I assume he lived into a decent old age.
He did. He did. Well, he died actually to breast cancer. So I always use. I have a mustache tattoo that I use for him, and I use that for Men's
Oh,
Breast Cancer Awareness.
oh
So
okay.
just a little plug that men can also get breast cancer, and it is very serious, and it often goes undetected until it is very late, which was the
Wow.
case with my grandfather as well. So, but
Wow.
yes,
Well, see,
he lived to be. Oh, I don't remember how old he was when he died, but he died in late 2019, right around Christmas. So, not very long ago.
but he didn't die of complications from
No,
diabetes.
no, he didn't.
So he did manage that well enough.
He did.
Uh, yeah. But that's why, the more people hear these stories, the more they realize that these are
Hmm.
real people dealing with real problems that they didn't ask for.
Yeah.
And that's what's got to change. I can tell just by hearing you how much respect you had for him,
Hmm.
and that's the way it ought to be. You know, that there are people who are totally the opposite. There was one woman in a group I had who told me that her aunt had diabetes, and when this woman went to visit her aunt, she would go through all of her drawers because that's where she hid her candy. Poor woman, the diabetics can eat candy,
Yeah.
just not a lot of it,
Hmm.
or if you're going to go for a long walk afterwards, you can eat sugar, but you have to deal with it. But this person took it upon herself that she was going to deny that woman,
Mm.
that candy. It's unbelievable the stuff that goes on out there.
Yeah.
But that's not respect. That's
No.
demeaning to treat somebody like that.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And I mean, as far as my grandfather goes, I can't imagine trying to take away his peanut brittle. I can't imagine trying to do that to him. It would be so
Huh?
sad.
It would be sad.
It would be really sad. Well, I
But
mean, I was
but
just
people
gonna
think,
say, I feel like if you get your program going in another part of the country, like how cool is that that it's gone from you doing it locally to another part of the country, and now you've got all this stuff online. Like it's really amazing. It's really amazing. You're making all these connections and you're helping so many people. So good job. I mean, you're doing great.
well, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing, if society really did change?
Yeah.
And this is all good stuff, and this is not like I'm not sharing anything that isn't just the basic truth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not selling you some kind of a miracle cure or telling you anything that's not the absolute truth. It's just stuff that everybody ought to know. And I really hope that this just takes off like wildfire. If you have listeners, if other podcasters have listeners, I do get a lot of hits on my website. So I'm hoping once the videos are out there that those will start to move. I really believe. Well, you'll see the video when I send it to you. I think you'll agree that when people start seeing it, that they'll want to share it with others,
Yeah.
and that's what I hope. And it just gets hopefully it gets exponential and it just
Mm-hmm.
goes by leaps and bounds.
More and more traction. Absolutely. Yeah, bite marks is, and also sometimes you need to get your blood sugar back up and you need sugar. Yeah, taking away someone's sugar that they have stashed like
Really.
so my former mother-in-law, she was a diabetic as well, and she used to keep peanut butter by her bedside because there were a couple of times where she borderline went into a diabetic coma, like the paramedics had to come out and everything. She was so disoriented, would not allow anyone to help her and all of this stuff. And can you imagine if someone said, "Oh, well, you can't have peanut butter by your bed. It has too much sugar." Like, because her problem was not high blood sugar; it was low blood sugar most of the
Yeah.
time. And so, imagine being like, "Well, you're diabetic. You don't get to have this by your bedside," when it's something that could literally save her life.
Yeah. It's a question of balance.
Yeah.
You know. Um, People like that woman I told you about with the Neon's candy,
Hmm.
she really thought that sugar was poison.
Yeah.
And her, no matter what, her aunt could not have sugar. I
Mm.
mean, never mind just giving the woman a break and letting her have a sweet once in a while, even if it's
Yeah.
breaking the rules, I mean, where's the humanity here?
Yeah, for sure. Oh
But that,
yeah,
those,
I don't. So this comment says I don't even have diabetes and I keep honey packets in my car for in case I get ragey because I haven't eaten that day. It's like those grab a Snickers campaigns, where they get hangry and then, anyway.
talking about these people, there's actually a term in the diabetes community. People like that are called the diabetes police.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, these are people, have you heard that?
No, but
Uh,
I understand the term completely.
well, if you read diabetes publications around the holidays, there's usually an article in there about handling the diabetes police. Somebody's going to come over and criticize you for eating something
Hmm.
sugary. Every year it happens.
Ugh, what a pain. Yeah. I mean, it's the same with fat people. Like you
Yeah.
wouldn't believe the number of times someone has said like, "Sure you need all that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm hungry. Thanks for asking though." You don't know me. You don't know my life. Back off.
But that's another thing too, though. We talk about genes. There are over 400 genes that impact people's, you know, becoming overweight.
Hmm.
There are all kinds of factors that are beyond your control.
Yep.
Besides that, I mean, there are a lot of overweight people who are in great physical shape.
Yeah.
Just because you're overweight doesn't mean you're sickly.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, and that's one of the things that not the doctor that I have now because I love her and she's wonderful. But one of the last doctors that I had when I was trying to find a good doctor, that was one of the things that he said. He was like, "Oh, well, you're overweight, so you probably have a bunch of different things." Diabetes was one of the things that he also, a doctor said, "Well, you probably have diabetes. It's probably something. So we'll get all of your blood work done." Everything came back perfectly normal ranges, obviously, except for my weight. And he was like, "Oh, I can't believe that all of this is in the normal ranges." I'm like, "Yeah, fuck you, I'm out. Bye." Like, that's not a
See that
medical professional. I don't need that from you at all.
that's exactly what I was talking about.
Hmm.
Guys like that and women like that, they are a problem because they believe it too.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah,
why they do. That it's not a fact. So I guess it's just been repeated for so long that
I guess
everybody just
so.
accepts that that's what the truth is.
Yeah. And obviously, there is a genetic predisposition both on my father's side and on my mother's side. So I do have to, I do full blood work every year just to make sure that I catch it in time if I don't catch it between annuals. I do full blood work just to make sure because I know that that exists on both sides. And they test for other things. They test for high blood pressure because my grandfather had that. They test for high cholesterol because my dad had that. So, like, there's all these things that I make sure to get tested for. Diabetes happens to be one of them, but it's not because of my weight. It's because I know what's on both sides.
What? Because you know the genetics
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, if you do get pre-diabetes, which is the first step before
Hmm.
you get diabetes, and this is another thing. They treat pre-diabetes and diabetes as though they're different conditions. They're really not. You have insulin resistance. Early on, your pancreas produces a lot of insulin still, so the level stays low. That's pre-diabetes. As time goes on and you lose the capacity to produce insulin, your blood sugar will rise, and it finally reaches a point where it's called diabetes. They aren't different diseases. They're
Hmm.
just benchmarks on this
Yeah.
continuum from low blood sugar to high blood sugar. And that's one of the things that's confusing about diabetes. But you're doing the smart thing by checking yourself
Yeah.
because if you do wind up with prediabetes, what it means is that you can just start watching your diet and making sure you go for a walk every once in a while
Hmm.
early on, because the earlier you do that, the better the chances are that you're going to preserve your pancreas's ability to produce that insulin.
Yeah.
It's going to make it much easier to control your blood sugar as time goes on.
Hmm.
So, that's a wonderful thing you're doing for yourself.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't I don't find out until I got problems.
Yeah.
They come in, I like, Doc, I don't have any feeling in my toes. You know, by that time, there's been some damage done.
Yeah.
But catching it early it's a huge deal.
Mhm.
And by
Absolutely.
the way, they have a thing called the Diabetes Prevention Program. What that really means is that you can prevent your blood sugars from reaching the diabetic level. Doesn't mean you're going to get rid of the condition. You're just going
Yeah.
to keep your blood sugars lower.
I haven't heard of that. That's interesting. It looks like there's some information on the CDC website about it though, so that's good. I'll pop that into the chat as well. Is there anything that you do now in terms of self-care or other exercises or activities to support your own mental health and well-being as a diabetic?
As a diabetic, I don't know that I do anything different from anybody else.
Yeah.
I play with my grandchildren. It keeps me in great mental shape.
I love it. Go right back to that. I mean, it really does too, because
It does.
you're looking at things from a childlike perspective, which uh, many of us in our adult lives don't get the chance to do a lot.
Well, someday you will.
Someday,
Give it
yeah.
enough time, you will.
Right? Oh,
But yeah,
my 10-year-old was just talking about the other day. Do you think if I never have, what did he say? Do you think if I never have any babies, or if my partner doesn't want to have babies, that adoption is okay? And I'm like, you do whatever you want. You don't feel pressure to have babies if you don't want to have any at all. I'm like, I can always, go find a cousin who's had a baby and babysit for them. Like, that's no big deal.
yeah. Actually, one of my grandchildren is adopted. Matter of fact, her birthday was 2 days ago. She's
Aw,
a year old. Yeah.
a year old.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep. My son and daughter-in-law worked for a couple of years. There's a lot that goes
Hmm.
into adopting a child. I had no idea
Yeah.
if it was as involved as it is. But yeah, a year ago that they got a phone call. This mother down in Baton Rouge would like you to have her child, and the child was going to be born that week. So they flew down there. They were there when
Wow.
the baby was born. Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
it
that's really
really was
awesome.
wonderful. The
Yeah,
child's healthy. It's a little girl, beautiful
that's
little
awesome.
girl.
I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah, adoption, I really feel like is something that is difficult to do, but also enormously rewarding. My same grandparents. This conversation is just all about my grandparents. Apparently, same grandparents were foster parents, and they had two kids, and then they also had many foster kids, but two foster kids who are still like, it's an aunt and an uncle to me, right? So they stayed with my grandparents for the rest of their kid lives, I guess. They were
wow.
never formally adopted, I don't think. And then I have two uncles on the other side who were adopted. One of them, his birthday was just yesterday. So, but yeah, I mean, adoption's really special to me, I think. And also, it's just a good answer if you have trouble, if you don't want to have kids or anything like that. It's a fair option, and you're doing a lot of really, real good there as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yep. I agree.
Well, it is time for our magic moment, and my cat is excited for that. Oh no, it's not lighting up. Oh no. Okay. Uh-oh. Oh, there. Oh, it lit up for a second. Well, oh, okay. All right. Here it goes. I'm not going to move. If you could wave a magic wand and eliminate one common opinion, misconception, or theory surrounding mental illness, disabilities, or talking about mental health, what would it be? Or in this case, diabetes also. It will
Which is
not stay
odd.
lighting up.
I don't know if this quite fits what you're looking for, but I feel for autistic people.
Mm.
And I would like to see that go away.
Mm-hmm. Just kind of the stigma around and the poor treatment, or
It's a stigma. Somebody close to me is autistic, and life is just hard.
yeah.
Um, people don't relate to him the way they relate to other people, and
Hmm.
he doesn't relate to them the way
Yeah.
other people do either. It's just hard. You can be intelligent and healthy and all the rest of it, but um, it's like that jigsaw puzzle pin that people wear for autism.
Hmm.
It's like there's just something missing.
Hmm.
If we could figure out what that is and how to put it back, that would be a great thing.
Yeah. I just last week was talking to Sam Mitchell specifically about autism, and it was a great conversation. But yeah, I mean, the world is really not built for someone who has autism, and it's really difficult to get along in a world that is built for a whole different group of people than what you are able to understand, really.
Yep.
So yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Chet, so much for being here with us today. I appreciate you taking the time, chat. If you have any questions for our guests, feel free to go ahead and pop them in now. We're going to start wrapping up here. And if you want to connect, I'm going to put your website in one more time. So challengediabetes.us is the website. And if you need to, go on there and look for anything or connect with Chet in some way, feel free to click through on that link. And Chet, I'll just turn it over to you for a little bit and ask if there's anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to cover or any resources or personal recommendations. I'll just give you the floor.
Well, I don't know how much to add. I guess I would just like to emphasize how important it is that everybody, whether you have diabetes or not, learn what the facts are, understand what diabetics are putting up with, and support them, and don't criticize them for a disease that they did not bring on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we can open society to treat diabetics with the respect they deserve, that you'll encourage more and more diabetics to get the treatment they need. Because another aspect of this is that, especially in our lower socioeconomic groups, people ignore diabetes, something terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they do the wrong things. They drink a lot of sugar soda. They have no idea what a carbohydrate is, and they literally wind up getting amputations and dying young. And I've talked to a lot of people who either have had this happen to them or people close to them have had it happen to them. When I was doing the program for the University of Massachusetts, one of the groups that they had me talk to was it's called the Men of Color Health Awareness Program,
Mm-hmm.
and these were great guys. That I loved dealing with these guys, but the stories I heard were unbelievable. The guys actually in the program didn't have amputations, but one guy told me he had two sons who had their legs amputated. He was
Oh,
probably
wow.
60, and they were in their 40s, and this is what happened to them. Uh, and so the more we get rid of that stigma and start encouraging people, no matter what group you're in, to get care, the better off we'll all be. It's a terrible thing for the victim who has these conditions. But you know what? It's also a terrible expense for society in general.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very expensive disease, and you're going to need the cooperation of people to help fix it.
Yeah.
So that also underlies my hope of educating everybody. So if you like what you heard today, please share it with somebody. Tomorrow when you go to work, uh, just mention it and see what happens. By the way, I talked about Valley down in North Carolina. When she decided to get active in this endeavor, she started talking about diabetes herself. And you know what she told me? She said, "Yeah, I bring it up. You wouldn't believe how many people have diabetes." Well, yeah, I would, but they don't talk about it. But she said once she
Yeah.
brings it up, they do talk about it. So you've got these informal support groups that are just kind of springing up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for crying out loud, it's good stuff. Ought
Yeah.
to happen more.
Absolutely. Well, Chet, thank you for being here with us today. I really appreciate it. And Bitemark says, thank you so much for being here. I look forward to the video when it's available. Yes, same, very much the same. Appreciate you taking the time and joining us here tonight.
Okay, thank you, Mama.
Thanks. That brings us to the end of another episode of Even Tacos Fall Apart. I hope you found the discussion today with Chet as insightful and meaningful as I did. His journey with diabetes and his dedication to educating others about the condition truly highlight the importance of understanding and empathy in managing chronic illnesses. Living with diabetes or supporting someone who has it requires a lot of resilience and patience. The mental toll it takes is real, and it's something we need to talk about more openly. Chet's experiences remind us that no one should have to face this journey alone. Whether you're managing diabetes, another chronic condition, or just navigating life's ups and downs, know that it is okay to seek help and lean on others for support. Reflecting back on our conversation, it's clear that education and awareness are crucial. Understanding that diabetes isn't just about diet or lifestyle choices, but is a complex genetic condition that can help us break down the stigma and offer better support to those affected. Chet's insights on diabetes burnout also remind us of the importance of mental health. It's vital to acknowledge when we feel overwhelmed and to take steps to care for our mental well-being. As we wrap up, I want to encourage you to take what we've talked about today and think about how it applies to your own life. Whether you're dealing with diabetes or another challenge, remember that you are not alone. Reach out to our community, seek support in your community that you already have, and keep educating yourself and others. Thank you for tuning in and being a part of this conversation. Like I said, your engagement and your support are what keep me and keep this show going and really provides that motivation. So if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and review the show. That helps reach more people and continue these important discussions. Stay connected with me on social media. I am MommaFoxFire everywhere. Share your thoughts and let me know what topics you'd like to hear about in future episodes. Together, we can keep breaking down the stigma around mental health and chronic illnesses, one conversation at a time. Until next time, remember that even when things fall apart, we can still find strength and support in each other. Take care, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next episode.